Leave us out of the I use outline.
All right. Whoa, that was loud. Sorry, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'll just call our meeting to order. It is Thursday, 11:34, September 15th, and we'll get going on our Utah Lake Commission meeting. I wanted to excuse Brad Ross, Lori Backus, Mayor Kafusi, and Brian Hewlett. Unfortunately, they could not be here with us today, but we'll go ahead and start with our introductions. Typically at this meeting, we just give a little introduction for who's here and serving. So how about we just start with you, Eric, and then we'll come around the table.
Yeah, my name's Eric Ellis, Executive Director with the Utah Lake Commission.
Carolyn Lundberg, Mayor of Linden City.
Jed Muhlstein, City Engineer for Alpine City, just filling in for Lon Watt.
Thank you.
Corey Pierce, Spanish Fork City. I'm actually an alternate for Shane who's here, so I'm keeping him company.
Sorry. Shane Marshall, City Council.
Spanish Fork City. Terry Peterson, Orem City Council for Orem.
Will Lee, Utah County Commission.
Okay, I'm Julie Fulmer, and I'm filling in for Michelle, and I serve as the mayor of Vineyard.
Carrie Malkovich, the City of Woodland Hills.
Ben Steyerman, I'm filling in for Director Joel Ferry of the Department of Natural Resources.
And Mike Rao, Central Utah Water Conservancy District, filling in for Gene Shawcroft. He's out of town.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and go online? I guess I can just read some names. Brittany's phone. Should we welcome? We're so grateful to have you online. It's a little bit hard, so I'm just going to say thank you for being here, and we'll move on to our next agenda item. All right, we'll go to our action items. We need a motion to approve the governing board minutes from June 16th, 2022. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Oh, okay. Okay, first by Carrie, second by Commissioner Lee. Is that right? Was that you, Bill? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. We need to review the monthly budget reports for June through August 2022.
Okay, as far as review, the June monthly budget report is the fiscal year end. And so as you glance through that, we're at or near our budget expiration for the year. And then we jump into the next 2 months where we're starting the new fiscal year. We ended where we were hoping to. Everything was within budget from last year. And we got a lot accomplished, and it was a fun year. This next year is our last year as the commission, as I've mentioned in the email communications that have come out. And we're already off to a good start. We've got a partnership that we'll talk about with forestry on acquiring a new machine for lake work. And we'll just plan to move through the year until we complete a master plan with the Lake Authority. At that point, we will dissolve the Lake Commission. You'll notice at the end of our agenda for today, we have a to be determined, but we will plan a banquet dinner at the time that we're going to dissolve the Lake Commission to celebrate the successes of the commission and to really give thanks to all our board members that have served on the commission and been such great partners in all the work being done on the lake. So that's to be determined. It'll be sometime early in the spring is my guess. And we'll arrange for a nice dinner and probably have it be something that you can come out and bring an extra with you and have an enjoyable evening somewhere down near the lake.
Eric, are you thinking that is in March, April, May, just somewhere in there?
One of those months then, yes. It depends.
Yeah.
I wish that we could be more accurate, but because it is hinging on the completion and adoption of our master plan, we have yet to nail down a timeline as we're just kind of getting started on that process. So that'll be dictating when we're ready to take that step.
That's great. Are there any other questions from the board or the commission? No? All right, thank you, Eric. Well, let's go ahead and move on to item number 3, which is the Utah Lake Water Quality Study, and Director Mackey and his
Chair,
team.
Could
Chair?
we get a motion on those financial?
Oh, do we need, yeah, I apologize. There were no questions. Can I get a motion for approval?
I'll make that motion that we have reviewed the monthly budget report from June to August 2022.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee.
Second.
A second by Carolyn. Okay, thank you so much, Mayor. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you for that, Eric. Okay, we'll move on to our Utah Lake Water Quality Study, and Director Mackey and his team will review the study updates and the timeline to study completion and implementation.
And we have Scott Daly here today with the Division of Water Quality who will be presenting.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. Scott Daly with DEQ. As Eric said, I'd like to ask that we excuse John today. He's in Denver for some other meetings, not able to be here with us. So yeah, I'll just go over, where we're at with the water quality study. I know this group has heard a number of updates over the years. All right, thank you. We, kicked the study off in around 2017, have been working with our scientists and stakeholders since that time, have made quite a bit of progress. So I'd just like to give you an update on where things are at today and where we think things are going. Here we go. Okay. All right, so, the whole point of this study was to address some longstanding water quality concerns that have been observed on the lake, over the last several years, but also, some concerns that the division has been tracking for, last 15 to 20 years or so, when the lake was first identified as potentially having some concerns associated with nutrient pollution specifically. And so the point of this study is to really take a deep dive and understand, what are the specific concerns with nutrients? How do they lead to potential impairments of our uses of recreation, agriculture, and sustaining our aquatic life resource in the lake? And ultimately trying to come up with 2 products. One, a recommendation for a new water quality standard that'll protect those uses. And then 2, a management plan or a management strategy that'll help us get there and make meaningful improvements in water quality. Okay. So and I know this is probably a review for most everyone again, but the process in which the stakeholders and scientists are all operating in, I think, is an important one for everyone to understand. The core components of this study are really the steering committee, which are the stakeholder representatives. There's 16 different communities or stakeholder interests represented around the lake in the steering committee. They're the ones that are ultimately responsible for coming up with the policy-based decisions that are informed by the information provided to them by the science panel. The science panel is a 10-member panel of local and national experts in issues that are, relevant to Utah Lake. And so they're providing information to the steering committee. And then ultimately, I've made a modification to this graph just due to the timing. That information will be passed from the steering committee to the Utah Lake Authority. Originally, that was proposed as the commission, but based on our project timeline, we think the information will really be flowing from the steering committee, recommendations from the steering committee to the authority, since that'll happen over the next couple of years. It'll be at least a year out until we see some of that work. Okay, so the foundation of the study is a set of charge questions that were developed collaboratively between the science panel and the steering committee. And really the goal here is to, at the end of the day, come up with some recommendations or solutions for things that could potentially improve water quality. And identifying that condition. Is there something that can be done? And so that's kind of the high level charge question 4 that you see here on the screen. And on all the preceding charge questions are really structured around being able to gather the information that's needed to inform that 4th question. And so the 4 high level questions were developed by the steering committee, sent to the science panel for further consideration. The science panel developed a series of highly detailed, more scientific based questions that they've used to frame up their entire research program and identifying, the existing information that we have and any missing information that is needed. And so with respect to those charge questions, the science panel mapped out all of the available information and data that many of the partners, many of the folks in this room are collecting, all of the ongoing studies and completed studies that have been done by our local universities, local state agencies, June Sucker Recovery Program, for example, and compiled all of that information, matched it up against the charge questions, and then identified a series of remaining information gaps. And what you see here on the screen are a series of water quality related studies that were recommended to help fill those gaps and provide complete information for the science panel to inform those future decisions. And this has been really the core of the science panel's work over the last 3 years, 4, if I'm counting correctly, I guess. Making quite a bit of progress. A number of those studies are completed. Almost all of the on the ground work will be wrapped up by December of this year. So we're getting very, very close. And if it's not completed, it'll be very, very close. We'll continue to work over the next 3 to 6 months in the new year to apply the water quality models, working with the science panel, and incorporate all of the information that we've learned and try to start developing those recommendations to pass on to the steering committee. And so we see this as I see this as a transition period where research and information gathering is kind of wrapping up, and we're starting to apply that information and formulate responses to those charge questions and recommendations to the steering committee for potential nutrient criteria down the road. And happy to take questions along the way if you'd like. Yeah,
I have a question for you. What is your base? Because I saw on there going back to before settlement. Well, we have no measurements back then of what the water quality was like. So what kind of base level are you going for? And I preface this a little bit with water standards because there was a time in which, as technology gets, we can monitor further and further and deeper into air and water. And there was a time in which we thought that air quality was at a certain standard, but now that standard is not even close to what we're trying to base. So I want to know what the base is. Right. What's the base that we're trying to measure to?
Where the lake has come from. I kind of see that as 2 different questions in a way. Knowing what condition the lake was in 1850 pre-settlement, is helpful context to serve, to help understand how the lake has responded to increases in development and human pressures around the lake. But I don't see that as necessarily the endpoint or the target, right? I don't think the science panel or any members of the steering committee are interested in using that pre-1850 condition as the endpoint.
Okay.
Is my right, exactly. So thanks, Eric. Yeah, so I think they're kind of 2 of the same. Just because the lake was at a certain place in the past doesn't mean the steering committee and the science panel want to manage the lake to that same condition moving forward. And the baseline question, the science panel, one of the studies here, it's a paleolimnology study. That's wrapping up. They commissioned a study to kind of evaluate the sediment layers in the lake, basically, and look at various indicators in the sediments. From algal pigments are preserved really well in the lake, so we can see how they've changed over time. Different aquatic organisms are preserved in the sediment cores over time, so we can see how they have responded. We can actually measure the nutrient concentrations in the cores. And so all of that information is being compiled into basically a prediction of what the past lake condition looked like. And this is one study, the paleolimnology study is one study the science panel explicitly commissioned, but there are others that have also recently wrapped up. And so in total, there's 3 or 4 different paleo related studies that'll be used as information to kind of understand what that pre-settlement condition was. But even in my perspective, more importantly is understanding how and why the lake changed since pre-settlement from that time until current. All right, so transitioning more to some work that the steering committee has been taking on, Science panel spent a lot of time and effort trying to understand how the lake functions, how it processes nutrients, how it relates to impairments in our use. The steering committee is starting to transition into well, then what, right? So how do we apply all of that information into some kind of future program that might actually make meaningful improvements in water quality? And so over the last, about 6 or 8 months ago, the steering committee started mapping out what they would like to see in an implementation program. Everything from identifying very specifically where the sources are, how much is coming from each source, what their relative contribution is, and then their relative importance to the lake today. And then identifying, of those sources, is there a meaningful difference that can be made? Is there opportunities for improvement? And then how do we get there? So, if, for example, there's some source of runoff that we're interested in that might impact water quality, what can be done about it? What are the specific approaches? How much is it going to cost? Is it actually feasible to make improvements in the lake? So cost and feasibility and those kinds of things are absolutely important. So the steering committee has been managing that work kind of in a parallel path while the science panel works towards wrapping up their initiative. And the end product for this we see as an implementation plan that the commission on the future authority could use to inform decisions related to water quality and improving water quality conditions in the lake. Okay, in terms of timeline, this all started with initial information gathering in 2015. We're working now towards the end of our phase 2, which is essentially those 3 components I talked about, wrapping up our strategic research plan and now beginning to develop our criteria. We're a little with some of the research conversations that are happening now. The criteria development is maybe not quite as far along as what's depicted on the screen here, but we're starting to make some meaningful progress there. And as I just mentioned, the implementation planning. We're targeting to wrap up a criteria recommendation with the steering committee towards the end of 2023. So a little over a year from now. Might be a bit of an aggressive timeline, but that's kind of the goal that we all have. And then moving more towards, implementation, what things can be done, when can they be done, and so on. And the implementation timeline, in reality probably goes beyond 2030. We're just looking at 2030 here more specifically because the regulated community, we've made a commitment, Division of Water Quality has made a commitment to the regulated community that permits will not be adjusted with any recommendations from this study until after 2030. And so that's why that specific date is mentioned there. Okay, with that, I'll take any other questions.
Okay, are there any other questions? No, thank you so much for this update. We really appreciate it and all the work that you guys are doing. We'll go ahead and move on to Corey Pierce, who will introduce the Spanish Fork Water Waste Treatment Plant groundbreaking.
While Sam's pulling that up, I'm Corey with Spanish Fork City. I manage the wastewater division. We've been working for many years, working towards a new treatment plant for a lot of reasons. We had a groundbreaking recently, and Eric just wanted me to give an update of where we're at and what that might mean for Utah Lake. So you're good. Okay. Little bit about why. There's a lot of reasons we looked into why we were replacing our treatment plant. It's old. A lot of the tanks and infrastructure were built in the 1950s, but the majority's in the 1980s. It's nearing capacity, both biologically and hydraulically, and it's old. You can see some of those pictures. We really are using Band-Aids in places to try to keep things going till we can figure out a solution. And we also, the existing plant can't meet the nutrient criteria from the state. Okay. But we really have seen, you know, as time has went on and the infrastructure is getting older, we're seeing the O&M costs rise and, you know, just that significant investment it would take to bring it up to any sort of code is not worth it. We good now? Think we're good? Okay. So as we looked at a new treatment plant, we had a lot of goals. We of course had the phosphorus limit looking at that's currently been implemented. Our ammonia criteria for our plant is going about 50% lower than it is today. We're anticipating future nitrogen requirements and even lower phosphorus as the Utah Lake study that Scott talked about comes out. And so we really wanted to plan for the future, not only for what's here today, but knowing things are coming in the near future. We're looking at reuse into our pressurized irrigation system and really wanted to just make all that work. So we selected a MBR facility, which ultimately uses filtration at the end to separate the solids and is a very high treatment, good quality water comes out of them.
Corey, I had a quick question for you.
Yeah.
And this is just random, but does your treatment have the ability or treatment plant have the ability or flexibility to lower those nutrient numbers with the
Yes.
new design? It does.
Yes. Our models are saying we'll be somewhere around 0.5 milligrams per liter on phosphorus. We'll see in real world what that translates to, but we're confident on the one. There will be chemical addition facilities in place that we could drive that quite low, as well as some process changes we've built in, and I'll explain that in a minute, how some of those future limits will accommodate. So, just an idea of what is involved in this treatment plant. Our headworks is the most expensive part of this project. It's a 3-story, kind of packaged everything into one. We've got this pointer. All the wastewater will come into the influent screens to remove any of that garbage and ragging and things that'll come through. It'll have grit removal. And then once it's there, it'll be pumped from this basement up to the fine screen room up top. And that'll remove everything down to 2 millimeters. Just a reference for 2 millimeters, I get asked that a lot. If you buy a new package of Crayola crayons, in the very end that's there, that's in the ballpark of 2 millimeters. So quite small, that's moving on to the process. Everything's dewatered, washed, and sent to the landfill. So in this building, it'll move on to biologic nutrient removal basins and the MBR basins. The treatment basins will run through kind of 3 scenarios, and what we do is vary the oxygen in there. The first portion of the treatment in these upper basins will be anaerobic, meaning little to no oxygen at all in there. Central basins will be anoxic, meaning there's some air but quite low, and then we'll really aerate at the bottom. What that'll do is it'll drive the nutrient, the biology to remove phosphorus is really what it's targeting. It does a decent job on nitrogen as well. One of the future things that we've built in this process is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm pushing the wrong button here. You'll notice this anoxic basin here, as well as this end aeration basin, are about the same size. With that, we worked in this extra basin to have the ability to switch those 2 zones to go to a 5-stage process that will really remove nitrogen. as that limit comes through. And we don't know what that'll be. To drive that process, there would be chemical addition. A lot of carbon needs to be added. And those chemicals can be pretty harsh, hazardous, and we're not ready to do that now until that treatment's needed. So we decided we would go with the three-stage process and make it easy to accommodate in the future, adjusting that. From those basins, it'll go into the MBR basin, which will house the MBR filters. That's really just a way to separate the solids from the water. The solids can then be pumped for further treatment, dewatered, and going to a landfill, and the water will continue on for disinfection and discharge. The MBR support building just will house all the pumps, blowers, facilities to operate that MBR. We'll also have a chemical room for cleaning those membranes, as well as chemical addition for nutrient removal if needed, and a lab to kind of house our process control. From there, it'll go on to UV disinfection. We currently chlorinate and have a residual that goes down, but that residual will be much lower and be a lot better for creek and the surrounding areas, as well as give us good disinfection. This is another area where we built a building to accommodate our build out flows, but we're just operating portions of it for today's flows. So we also have blowers in that area to re-aerate before we discharge. So what does this mean for Utah Lake? You know, Scott's giving brief summaries of the Utah Lake study. I've been involved with portions of that, and it's been ongoing, and there's a lot of debate on what can change, you know, what's the end point, what are we targeting? You could get a different response from everyone involved, I think. But with the many sources to Utah Lake, our project won't change the lake directly that much. We'll remove a lot of nutrients that contribute, but I think the adage that small changes in many areas can make a big difference. And I think that's the intent of this Utah Lake study, is try to bring all those things together to make a difference. We all want a better Utah Lake. We want to avoid the algal blooms. But just for reference, based on today's flows, you can see at the bottom of that table, the reductions in phosphorus and ammonia, which is a nitrogen source, that Spanish Fork will be discharging to the lake. That doesn't include reuse. That would just be the treatment permit limits, and we expect to come in below those. So we feel like it's good for the lake, and it'll be good for us, and our operators couldn't be more excited to have something new to run. So anyway, I don't know if there's any questions, but that's kind of what we're working on.
Any questions?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Are you taking any green waste and mixing it with your solids and doing any fertilizer?
We aren't at this point. Right
Probably
now,
wise.
we digest our solids and land apply them. With the new process, we need the carbon that we can't digest in the same way. So right now, the cost analysis says it's the right choice is to go to a landfill. We have done green waste and that in the past with a group, and it's hard to make that pencil.
Yep.
So I expect, especially as biosolids regulation, it's getting talked about a lot in the wastewater world. It's a bigger deal back east right now. That's great. And we're going to see things coming our way and need to find other solutions in landfill. Okay.
Thank you. We appreciate it. We appreciate the update, and we're excited for you guys. It's riveting for the Utah Lake wastewater wonks. So, okay, we'll move on to 5. Daniela from the Hutchings Museum will be talking about caring for the Utah Lake shoreline.
Oh, who's fighting this? I'm Daniela Larson. I'm the executive director of the Hutchings Museum Institute in Lehigh. I am so excited to be here. I think so many times the public and so many people don't see how much collaboration and work there is already happening, like with the lake. And I just think it's so great to see. I wish more people knew what was happening here. So I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about the history of some of the things that we do around Utah Lake and the surrounding area, and then what we have available for the public and for cities to learn more about it and be part of the process to plan for that. So can I have the mouse now? Okay, great. We are a post-secondary school with the state of Utah, so we do a lot of education, certifications, and research. And are you sure you're letting me control the mouse? It's jumping all over. Okay. I'm just trying to close this right here. So we partnered with State Forestry and Fire several years ago on some, if you could just X that out on your screen, maybe you can control better. On about 80 acres on the north shore of Utah Lake, and then also for a few years with Saratoga Springs, where they're now building the new marina for a field station out there. And this has been a really, really great opportunity for the public, for schools. We've done a lot of field trips out there. I know they're going to be talking about some of the Utah Lake field trips a little bit later. We focus more on upper grades when we're out there introducing students to STEM careers and a lot of collaborative science. So John Hutchings started doing research on Utah Lake, if I can get over to the right one. Okay. Back in the 1930s, he had a permit where he was murdering birds, is how a lot of the kids like to say when they come in and see all the eggs that we have at the museum, because back then that was the only way to do it. And they really researched not just Utah Lake, but the surrounding land. And I think that's one of the really important things that we need to be aware of, is that it's not just shoreline that we're losing to development, but all of those fields, like where I live in Saratoga Springs, that's where we would see a lot of nesting cranes and geese and just so much out there. So we need to make sure that we're addressing things as an ecosystem, not just as, in silos like we approach them. How do we have nature conservation friendly development? What kind of things can we be putting in place for that? This year we had a fellow, a grant that paid for a full-time fellow to come and actually digitize the whole collection that he had. It was all these handwritten note cards that has so much data about all of the nesting birds around Utah Lake and the surrounding area, Bird Island and all of that. And one of the things that we're finding is that there is so much research that has been done that we're not aware of, that is like sitting on paper somewhere. And working with a few different organizations to really digitize all of this so that it is available to anybody that needs it is one of the big initiatives that we've been working on. Can I just tell you which tab to click on for me, Sam? Okay, thanks. All right, if you could click on the first one, back to the field station, and just click on the research, that right there. We partner with National Geographic for iNaturalist and do different bio blitzes around the lake. Everybody can participate in these. It shows like a big map. Actually, just can you go back one tab? It was just down, no, that same, just back in the arrow at the top, just go back one window where you were. Okay, and then just down the page. Yeah, okay. Just a little bit more. Sorry about that. Okay, right there. Okay, so with National Geographic for what is known as like the Bio Blitz, there's an app called iNaturalist that anybody can join the project and take observations of anything that they see around the paths around like Utah Lake and the surrounding area. And that just collects so much data that can be used to let us know what is where. And we're also a registered field station. And so we get different like research projects and stuff that come through, and we'll stay for the summer, working on different things. The big initiatives that we have around Utah Lake currently right now are monarch habitat restoration. and kestrel box monitoring that we partner with Hawkwatch, and we also do along the Jordan River. Hi, Soren, I saw you online. So we have like volunteers that go and monitor all of the boxes. The kestrels are a bird that's really diminished in population and counts over like the last several years. We work a lot with business. We really like to consider the approach that we take, not as activism, but as environmental diplomacy. There's been a real pit when it comes to pitting development against conservation. And there's this whole environmental diplomacy movement that really works with development. How do we develop like bird-friendly communities, for example, instead of just saying there should be no more buildings with glass because of bird strikes? How do we educate, builders? And we've been able to work with builders like Colliers and Brandon Fugel, who's now like joined our board, to educate, builders on what can we do so that we avoid so many of these bird strikes that we're having. We're working with companies like Adobe, who's got the biggest glass building in Utah County right now, I think. They're putting kestrel boxes with cameras to monitor them on their properties. And those projects also become a great opportunity for employees to participate and get outside in nature and stuff as well. And we go out to companies and educate them on some of those things. Can you scroll down just a little bit more? I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Okay. So this is like the map that can you click on that Utah Lake map? So this is the iNaturalist project that we've been doing for a few years out there that anybody can join. And we'd love to work with, the cities that have property right around the lake to just put up educational signage that let people join these projects. People are really excited to participate, but you can see there's been over 6,000 observations and all the different species. It also really helps to track where things are if we want to go back and check on them, especially when it comes to, things that are really endangered or struggling right now. Can you click on the tab that says mayor at the top? Mayor, I think it's like 3 over from where you're at. Yeah. And Mayor Fulmer, I need to apologize. The Lehigh Free Press wrote up this article and they just talked about Mayor Johnson from Lehigh, but if you'll scroll down.
He's lovely.
He is lovely.
He can get the press.
Mayor Fulmer and Mayor Johnson in Lehigh took the National Science Foundation has, for example, it's a Mayor's Monarch Pledge to create monarch-friendly communities and have places that have wildflowers, native wildflowers that they can grow. Those kind of projects are the things that we're trying to do to really just educate and be able to talk to, cities about even like in Lehigh at like some of the parks where they have traditionally just put in, just wood chips and green bushes. Now they're putting in some of like the Utah native pollinating wildflowers that also are great. They're really drought tolerant and, preserve a lot of water. And, if a lot of people and different organizations and businesses start like planting like little bits of some of these pollinating wildflowers, we start to make up some of the land that we have been losing over time to development as well. Can you just click on the next one over? Yeah, to the right, the bird-friendly communities. Oh, and you can click out of their ad. Okay, thanks. So we've recently started, it's a separate organization, but it's under the museum. It's the Utah Lake Audubon chapter. And Audubon's, goal is to just preserve birds in the places that they live. And they do a lot of education. There's a lot of resources on projects like building bird-friendly communities, what kind of, plants, what things to not put out. We work very closely with the Tracy Aviary as well. Some of the programs that they have, like Lights Out and educating people on that sort of thing. The other big part that we do at the museum is a lot of like the cultural preservation and stuff around Utah Lake, working directly with some of the tribes that used to live in the area, getting a lot of their stories. We still have boxes in storage at the museum that are just labeled Indian Mound from 1930s. when there was the really big drought, there was some mounds that were exposed, and John Hutchings excavated some of those. And to my horror, when I first got there, there still were some little bits and pieces of remains that needed to be repatriated and other things. Collection laws and attitudes were very, very different back then. So we're not trying to judge it. We're just trying to make it right. But there's a lot of really great history and cultural history and knowledge and wealth like around the area that we'd really love to, partner with communities and organizations that are working around there to preserve. Let's see if I can, let me try one. Okay. We do have, as part of this with the field station and the partnership with National Geographic for like the learning framework, a lot of the education that they have meets a lot of like the requirements for more of like the upper grades for schools. But they also have some very tried and true projects and classes and stuff like that that are just really great for like any community. There's just a lot of outreach available out there. A couple of the things that we're interested in doing as we move forward is finding some land to put a greenhouse on that we have a grant for from the state, and the original location that we had isn't working out, but that's something that we're still looking for. A lot of the wildflowers in Utah, for example, like the Sega lily, which is our state flower, is actually endangered now, and we've received a grant to help propagate and get that back out there. Excuse me. Again, there's a lot of history that's also connected to that flower that even gets into some of like our military engineering units and stuff that were from Lehigh and how they use that for their symbolism. There's just a lot of crossover in so many things. And we're really working hard to educate people about the whole ecosystem of how it all works together, and how to be wise about, water. Things are changing really fast with temperature and with the population, increasing. And we are, just here to help educate and explore as many options as we can look at. The museum is open until 9 o'clock. We'd love to have more. I think some of the cities have like youth councils and things like that that can help, that can get involved if they're looking for, different projects and things. We've also started a lecture series where we have like, for example, one project that was done this year that was experimenting on, carp and where they lay their eggs, and they were trying mats to see if they could, get them from, there's just how many they could get out that way with the eggs. Having that research presented at the museum as well. We do have a June sucker tank there now that is, June suckers actually are not that interesting to watch. They just kind of sit there. But, kids like them anyway. So yeah, so we're just, here to help. We're excited to keep doing work around Utah Lake. We do a lot of cleanup projects, a lot of times with different youth groups or wards or organizations that are looking for projects to do. And I think somebody's going to talk a little bit later about the day of service, right? Those kinds of things. So if anybody needs anything like that set up, we're happy to take groups out there anytime.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions? No, thank you for all you're doing. We really appreciate it. Did you have something you wanted to say, Carrie?
I was just wondering, since your focus is on the shoreline and you have a lot of volunteers from the cities that are around the shoreline, do you also accept volunteers that are from cities that don't have a shoreline?
I apologize. We need someone on the shoreline for the greenhouse close to the lake.
Daniela, would you mind coming back to the microphone? Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. We're looking for somewhere around the shoreline for the greenhouse project, because with the where we got the grant, that was, part of where it needs to be permanently in the future. But definitely, absolutely, we work with communities all over because, things like bird strikes, planting, pollinating gardens and stuff, that is just all over. So we work a lot throughout all of Utah County and even Salt Lake.
So if we direct our residents then to go to your website, then they're able to click on that volunteer link and see what's available. Because some are ongoing volunteer projects and some are one-time projects.
And some are seasonal, like, kestrels
Okay.
only lay their eggs one time a year, but anybody can come to go and help. I think right now we've got 26 kestrel boxes that need to be checked, and there's probably about another 20 going up this year. So.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Russ Franklin with our June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program is just going to give us some updates on our recovery efforts.
I should be used to presenting in here. All right, I guess I've got the gauntlet thrown down. I'm going to make a boring fish seem kind of interesting. So we'll see how that goes. Real fast, I'm Russ Franklin with the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program. I am housed here in this building at the Central Utah Water Conservancy District. And hopefully it's not too loud. I'll try to adjust the mic, especially for those online. Hopefully I don't drown out, but I'm going to give you guys some updates on the program currently. Like a lot of things that you guys have been hearing over the years, this is a slow moving process. So sometimes it really doesn't seem like much is moving, but we are moving in the forward progression. We're not regressing. So number one, first and foremost, we're going to do a video that we put together this year. Kind of, it's a little bit, hopefully funny, a little bit entertaining, almost like a commercial, trying to give a little bit of backstory on the June Sucker.
Us online can't hear. Is there audio with this?
All right, so hopefully I love that because I don't have to talk as much, even though I do like talking, obviously. But it kind of gives a good overview, kind of informs the public. We put that on our June Sucker Recovery website, junesuckerrecovery.org. And I do believe our partners are going to be sharing that as well. I know it's on the Central Utah Water Conservancy District's website. and some of the YouTube channels. So just a few updates for those of you that have been around a little while. This year, during our spawning runs, at the end of May and the beginning of June, we had the largest spawning run that we've had ever since the program started of the pit tagged fish. So that basically, I don't know how many of you guys have the key fobs that you use to get into your buildings. When we have pit tagged fish, they kind of work in the same similar process. So basically, as the fish run across the sensors, they're almost like key fobbing in. And so we've been monitoring that for years. And this year we had over 5,000 pit tagged fish go across. There's my Yukon coming out. It's across, not across. Going across our pit tag readers. And, you know, last year we had about 4,000, and depending upon the year, it's, you know, every year it's gotten better and better. But what that equates to, you know, after we started doing the calculations, is basically if we have about 10% of the fish out there are pit tagged, that means we probably have around 50,000 spawning individuals. And if you look back in 97 and 98, there was only about 300 spawning individuals. So, you know, in how many years is that? Almost 98 to now, just over 20 something years, 24, 25 years. If my math's wrong, it's wrong. But so, yeah, we've increased all the way up to 50,000 fish. So it was a big deal this year. There, you can look on there, our spawning flows for those who are in water. You know, I put this together. We have 125 CFS. We extended it 2 weeks because we had kind of a weird spring where we had some rain that came down and other things towards the end of May. So it was a record-breaking year for us on that. The biggest news that we've got going on right now in the program is we're trying to work through our carp removal. This year with the lower lake levels, although low lake levels are bad for a lot of things, one thing low lake levels are good for is removing carp. You know, it causes the fish to be in a more tight area. The fishing is more effective. Utah lakes, obviously everybody here knows Utah Lake has a large surface area. Scaling is hard, but as the lake gets less and less surface area, it forces the fish into certain areas and we have more success on fishing. So also, well, before I play any videos, you know, one of the biggest hurdles that we're coming up against, obviously, like everybody else, is funding. We're looking at new options on carp removal technology. I mean, we've been doing this since about 2009. We've removed around 29.7 million pounds of carp since the beginning of the carp removal process. But unfortunately, things are getting more expensive. And with it getting more expensive and more technology out there, we're looking, everybody knows about inflation. You know, it's hitting all different types. If you have any projects out there, if anyone's building anything. So our carp removal cost has gone up significantly. So we're looking at viable options. We actually have a carp task force. Eric has attended those meetings. We're looking at what options do we have out there that so we don't lose any ground on what we've already accomplished over these past 10 plus years. So here's a little video. We won't watch the whole thing. Just kind of shows. I'll show a brief moment of carp removal here a few years ago. Let's see if I can get the mouse down there. So I'll stop it there. We don't need to watch the whole 6 minutes, but you guys can see how the process has been done since about 2009 of removing carp from Utah Lake. It's very labor intensive. They go out there with their nets. They put them out there. They're hands on, and especially when you get more big hauls in the years, it becomes more intensive. On top of that, this year they're combating with actually getting back into the harbor and back up the Provo River. Just with the low lake levels, you got boats that are heavier. They're pretty much bushwhacking through the mud. to get their boats back in through there. Let me go to the next slide here if we can. So we can get off the video. There we go. One of the things that we've been looking at and that Eric wanted me to touch on is we're looking at other technologies. What can we look at that could facilitate and be more cost effective, bigger bang for the buck, doing a cost benefit analysis. And out of Minnesota, there's a professor at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Berger. He has his own side company called Carp Solutions, and they have two products that we've been looking at. One of them is called a box trap that uses basically a net that's set up, depending upon the size as a box, obviously, that's the name. And they bait in carp, and after they become habituated to coming in, then they have a remote release. And then as it's released, then the size of the walls of the trap go up, and then they have time they can go in and manually remove the fish that way and sort through them. So they remove the non-targets and then they take the carp. We're looking at that. It's very, I don't want to say inexpensive, but given the options, it's not the most expensive option. Once again, it's the problem with scaling. It would work in certain areas during certain times of the year. It's just one more thing to add to the toolbox. The other thing that they do have that we're looking at, especially on a year like this year. So I told you guys about the spawning fish, the spawning June sucker this year. We had probably over 50,000 spawning June sucker in the Provo River. I don't know if anybody here went down and walked probably in July and in the beginning of August, the Provo River Trail, but there was a lot of carp. And if you look at social media, a lot of people were posting on social media in July and in August saying, hey, look at all these June sucker in the Provo River, but they weren't June sucker, it was carp. And we had unfortunately, a really good spawning run on carp because of the lake levels. So there's a lot of carp coming up the Provo River. And like I said, they were thick. I mean, the kids were out there catching them left and right. And if Mayor Kafusi was here, she could talk about the complaints that they got as people were catching them and leaving them on the side of the shore and they were stinking. But one of the other options that we're looking at is if anybody's grown up around the farm and you're familiar with electric fences, is they do a similar process, but in water. Basically, you can herd fish with an electromagnetic field. And that's what we were looking at to see if it's possible to have on certain years like this year, it would have been really effective. And doing kind of, table napkin math on the back, we probably would have removed almost 300,000 pounds of carp if we would have had it in the river this year. And I'll click on this, kind of give you a little example of what this is one that I'm really excited about, but like I said, I don't know if that's too small for you guys to read, but it just it's talking about how you can selectively push them through the fenced area.
Once again, you can see the conveyor belts, cuts down on the manpower that would be needed. Just imagine, each of the fish on average from Utah Lake weighs between 7 and 8 pounds. I think this year we're at 8.34 pounds, I think is what they averaged this year when they did our sample hauls. So you can imagine handling, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of fish. And so this would cut down quite a bit on specific years on the labor and the cost there. But also one of the big important things is if we can remove them before they spawn or as they're going up there, you don't have all the eggs coming out of there. I mean, you got to figure one of these females is probably producing over 200,000 eggs. Not that they're all going to be viable, and survive to adulthood, but so you figure for each one that you're removing as they're spawning before they get back into the environment, it has more of a greater effect. And then after they've spawned and then you're removing them, because typically right now the best carp removal time, the best fishing for the carp is September, October, November, which is after the spawning season for carp. So that's one of the biggest hurdles that we're dealing with right now with the program, is just trying to figure out, we've proven that it's been effective, and we're just trying to improve the process and secure funding into the future. So there we go. Another good thing that we have happened this year is we obviously, most of the people here are aware of that we do have the fish experimentary station up in Logan, and we do have June suckers that we rear up there, and we harvest eggs out of them. This year was a phenomenal year. Actually, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do because we're limited on space. We had that many eggs this year that we're running out of space, which is a good problem to have. So that was really, really awesome. And so we're moving stuff around just so that we can accommodate the large influx from this year's year class. We're going back, we're looking at the genetics. This was done probably in the late 2000, like 2008, 2006. We're going back looking at the genetic analysis to make sure that we don't have any bottlenecking, is what they call it in genetics. Basically we don't want anybody too closely related as we're breeding them. So we don't want any funky looking fish. And so we're trying to make it so that they're as genetically diverse as possible, given the fact that, all these fish came from about 40 individuals back in 97 and 98. So, I mean, there is genetic diversity, but you're limited by about 40 individuals. Last and well, there's two things, but make sure I spelled that right. I had to double check for a second. To this group, two things that we do happening. We're installing signs. One of these signs is going to be going down at the Hobble Creek Wildlife Management Area, which is down off of 1400 North. And then the other one is going to be over at the Springville Community Park. So there's going to be 2 stone signs and some other signs that are going to be down there for the Hobble Creek restoration that was completed in 2016, I do believe. But we finally have some signs that are, the one on the far right is completely done, and the one on the left is the mock-up, and it's in the process. So as people go around to different areas, there'll be more signs that showing Utah Lake and its tributaries and the partners to the program. With that, I mean, I could go on for hours, but I won't. So any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I have a question. The Loy family's been taking carp out of there for generations.
Yes.
Does that make a dent in the problem?
Yes. So when they started the process back in about 2009, the goal was to remove, and it sounds weird, they want to remove 75% of the carp biomass out of Utah Lake. And so when you looked at it, so you got 75%. So over the years, and it fluctuates a little bit. In 2017, we achieved that goal of 75% reduction in the biomass in the lake. So they look at the entire lake and they say, okay, of the percentage of fish out there, how much of that is carp? And so by doing this, we removed it so that it used to be, it's hard to wrap your head around, at least for me. But yes, we did remove. That's why, it's kind of hard to say, yeah, we've removed almost 30 million pounds. You can't spread that across, it doesn't quite add up because there's reproduction and the recruitment rates there. But yes, it does. The short answer is yes, it does make an impact on the lake, and we have reduced the abundance of carp in the lake compared to what it was by about 75%. But it does vary year to year. There's an old saying that says nature abhors a vacuum. And so as you remove more carp, that means that the ones that are in there
have an easier time of surviving. And so it's going to kind of go in a cyclical pattern. So it'll kind of go up a little bit and we'll knock them back down. Like this year, we're having really good removal rates. The harvest is really good this year because of the lake levels. And so that'll knock it back down. So they were trending upwards on the percentage of carp in the lake. And then this year we're going to knock it back down. And if we have another bad water year, unfortunately, we'd knock it down even more. So it does impact it. But but when we have really high water years, it's not nearly as effective out there.
And then you showed a proposal, or one of the slides talked about $800,000 to pay to, is that to expand their operation or
No,
what?
that's just, I wanted to, I asked them, say, hey, to keep going with this, they really haven't increased over the years. They're looking at new equipment. They're trying to get better guys on, cost of insurance, cost of doing business. And so, the cost of just them doing this has gone up dramatically. Your fuel costs, especially going across the lake where they're going out into other areas, just trying to be more effective. It just really has, dramatically increased the cost. I mean, if you figure, I know, having come from the private industry, but if you factor in hiring one person, year round, your minimum with insurance and everything else, you're probably $100,000. And so, I mean, you figure $800,000, that would just be 8 guys full time. And they have a larger crew than that. Yes, they're not full time, and that's not even covering insurance, guys, wear and tear on stuff. So it sounds large. $800,000 seems like a huge amount, but then when you start breaking it down, it's like, okay, that really isn't a large amount given the cost of doing business these days.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Well, that was a great video. I'll be sharing that with my council. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to Hannah Bonner with DWQ will be talking to us about harmful algal plumes monitoring efforts.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here today. I'm Hannah Bonner, like introduced, work with the Division of Water Quality. And one of my main responsibilities is managing our recreational water quality monitoring program, which includes monitoring for harmful algal blooms. So I'm going to talk briefly about the monitoring we're doing on Utah Lake and what we've seen this past year in terms of harmful algal blooms. Am I good to go on this, Sam? Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. So first of all, just to lay out a little bit what the goal of our recreational water quality program is, it is ultimately to help the public make informed decisions about their recreation. We always say in the same way you would check the weather before you went boating or swimming, we want to give a resource where people can check water quality concerns or status of different water bodies, including Utah Lake, and also give them the tools and information they need to evaluate risk. And if needed, either pick a different activity on the water body, a different location on the water body, or a different water body. And so on Utah Lake, the main health risk that we want to communicate and that we monitor for is harmful algal blooms, or HABs. And I know this audience is probably very well versed in these. But as we know, it's not algae, it's actually cyanobacteria that blooms, has this prolific growth, and then causes those health concerns. Cyanobacteria does naturally occur in every water body in the world, so it's not the presence of the cyanobacteria themselves that's the concern, but rather these bloom events where you go from hundreds of cells in the water to hundreds of thousands to millions of cells per milliliter, this explosive growth, which sometimes is caused by human activity, disturbance, and just the concentration of that many cyanobacteria cells can have health implications. And then many of these species also do produce cyanotoxins as part of their life cycle, which are toxins that can affect human skin, liver, and neurologic systems. And so when we're looking for recreational health, our main concern is high concentrations of cell density and consequently potential for high concentration of toxins that could hurt human health. And just to put this in context, this is a graph that shows harmful algal blooms around the world over the last 30 years. This is a great review that came out last year, and they found that the occurrence of harmful algal blooms worldwide are increasing. And so I share this just to put Utah Lake in context. Harmful algal blooms are not a Utah Lake specific problem, nor a Utah specific problem. but in fact are something that worldwide people and states are grappling with, trying to understand how to respond. And, as we've touched on before, this is oftentimes the result of eutrophication, this nutrient enrichment of water bodies. And of course, this is all exacerbated by changing climate, increased disturbance, etc. So what does this look like for Utah Lake? Again, our goal is to monitor for recreational water quality health. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to give you a broad overview of how that's played out this past year and ongoing. And then I'm happy to dive into any specifics if there's more details you'd like. But at Utah Lake, it's a result of monitoring, first of all, and then working with Utah County Health Department when needed to either issue or rescind health advisories, communicating these conditions to the public, and then also collecting meaningful data to better understand these events. So first of all, to talk about monitoring on Utah Lake is one of about 20 priority water bodies for the Division of Water Quality, and we monitor these priority water bodies proactively. So even if we don't have evidence of a harmful algal bloom, we're still visiting at least once a month to check out conditions. And then should a harmful algal bloom be detected, that monitoring is increased to a weekly time step. At Utah Lake, we're sampling at multiple locations. It's a big water body, so we're visiting locations along the shoreline and also on the water itself. And our goal in sampling is to investigate areas of highest reasonable risk, so areas where there is reasonable likelihood someone might be recreating, swimming, splashing, water skiing, etc., and could have exposure if there's these cyanobacteria blooms present. And we're quantifying two different variables in this monitoring. We're looking at the concentration of harmful algal bloom cell density, which is cells per milliliter, and then also the concentration of commonly occurring cyanotoxins. And these numbers feed into our advisory levels. This was issued just this past year, the most updated version by the Utah Department of Health and then also Department of Environmental Quality. And you can see there's those two quantities, so the toxigenic cyanobacteria cell density, and then also those common toxins, along with visual observation and reports of illness that all could go into issuing an advisory, which does come from the local health department. And so if we're seeing cell density above 100,000 cells per milliliter, or these different thresholds of toxins, that then would lead DWQ to recommend issuing an advisory, which is made by the health department. And so bringing this back to the Utah Lake concept, we do have a few advisories spread around the lake in effect, and this is something that has been developing throughout the summer. These images are from EPA's Cyan app, which uses satellite data to quantify potential cyanobacteria density in water bodies. And so you can see as soon as late June, we were seeing some cyanobacteria algal growth in the southern part of Utah Lake, especially Goshen Bay, Provo Bay. And then by mid-July, this was spread throughout the lake. And we have seen off and on this growth continuing throughout the summer. And this is pretty indicative of what we've seen in past years. Oftentimes these blooms thrive the most in shallow, warm, sheltered water. And so very often that's farther down the southern end of the lake or in bays and marinas. This is a graph that shows some of these quantities. So this is actually showing that HAB cell density measurement throughout this year, so 2022. And I've put on there that 100,000 cells per milliliter threshold, which is when we recommend a warning advisory be issued. We are monitoring all around the lake, but just for simplicity, I'm only showing 3 locations here at Utah Lake State Park, Lincoln Marina and Linden Marina. And then just one more thing to orient you, that y-axis is at a logarithmic scale, just to get everything fit nicely on there. And so you'll see in June, most of our measurements were below that warning advisory. And then as temperatures went up, continued to monitor, we started to exceed that threshold, first down in the southern part of the lake at Lincoln Marina, and then increasingly we now have seen exceedance in all 3 of these sites. And these last few sampling visits, we have been seeing harmful algal cell densities in the tens of millions. So some really, really high density areas, and particularly those really high density surface scums. This is mirrored if we also look at toxin concentrations. This is for microcystin, which is a liver toxin, at those same 3 sites over this past year. I've put on the advisory thresholds for both a warning in gray and danger in red, and a similar pattern to what we've seen in cell density, which makes sense. There's more of these cyanobacteria, more potential for toxin production. Again, first started seeing exceedances late June, early July, and increasing toxin concentrations has been the general trend. And you'll see we have had some really, really hot toxic detections in some of our marinas. And so as a result of that, we currently have warning advisories in place at most of the marinas. I've listed off where Utah County Health Department has issued those. And the silver lining is the open water of the lake is actually looking pretty good as of our last visit, but you do get the concentration of these high surface scums and high toxin production in these sheltered areas. So that's the broad overview of Utah Lake 2022 with our monitoring perspective. And again, this is helpful information to have because we're collecting this so that we can share this information with the public and help them make good recreation choices. As I said, communication is also a big part of what we're doing with this program. So we're collecting all this data, we're looking at these trends, and then communicating it in a variety of ways. The first way is communicating it to the health department, the state park, to marina owners, and to other stakeholders. And that's done through weekly email updates, sharing this data. And then also in a more public-facing sense through our website, habs.utah.gov, where we're posting these updates as soon as we have them so the public can also have information to where these advisories are, where we're seeing high cell density or high toxin production. And then we're also doing this on our social media, and partners may also choose to do it on their social media as well. Just a quick peek at what our website looks like. So this is the habs.utah.gov website. And so as you can see, if you haven't visited it, the public is able to go, select water bodies, and see what, if any, advisories might be in effect. And again, it's that idea of checking. This also says what water bodies we've looked at that look great so that people can also have confidence, or they can know if they need to adjust their recreation choices for the upcoming weekend. So I'd recommend if you haven't visited this website, there's some great resources on here, both about current conditions, about water body status, and also wonderful educational resources about these harmful algal blooms and about what sort of behaviors public and people can take to be safe. And then in addition, there's also some on-the-ground communication that's occurring at Utah Lake. So the health department puts up advisory signage when advisories are issued, again, to give public the information they need to recreate safely. And then there also has been a great effort by the Utah Lake Commission, state parks, to put up these permanent cyanobacteria awareness signs. There's a picture here of the one at Utah Lake State Park. And these signs are up all year round and give general information about identifying a cyanobacteria bloom and about safe activities, safe behaviors. So again, the public can also be proactive and aware. And then of course, we're also involved with outreach, education, working with the media, et cetera, to make sure this information is being communicated clearly. And so how are things going? I think, it's harmful algal blooms are not a new phenomena on Utah Lake, but I think we've developed this program a lot the last few years and been able to get a lot of cooperation together between WWQ, health departments, and other stakeholders to facilitate safe recreation, to be able to make sure when there is that optimal time this year in June, when we weren't seeing exceedances above thresholds, that people could feel confident recreating in wide areas. And now that we are seeing higher levels, to be able to pass all that information so the public can still continue to make wise and informed choices. And I think we have seen an effect of this. We do get a lot of visits to our website. We've had a decrease in calls to the Utah Poison Control Center regarding Utah Lake, and we are getting that information out there and a more educated public. So grateful to everyone on this council for their help with that, and happy to answer any questions or go into any more detail.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Any questions or comments? No, we appreciate your communication efforts. It's really helpful to our valley and to our residents. So thank you for all of that information. Now we will hear from our executive director and have you report. Thank you.
Thanks so much. As part of this report, I did ask a couple individuals to give us updates. Mike Rao is going to give us an update on the water drought conditions. So we'll turn the time over to Mike for a moment.
Yeah, I'd be happy to give a brief update. There is still a little bit of water in Utah Lake. And right now, the current level is about 6.1 feet below compromise. We're approaching the end of the water year next month, and we project that it'll end up close to about 7.5 feet below compromise. This is similar to 2016, maybe a little bit lower. So certainly lower than normal. An interesting tidbit is, as many of you know, the Central Utah Project imports water into Utah Lake from the Colorado River drainage. And right now there's about 1.5 feet of import water in Utah Lake. So without that water here in October, we would be really, really close to hitting empty from a storage standpoint. We'd be right near or at that inactive storage limit of 9 feet below compromise. So there's the key takeaway, I guess, is pray for snow. We need a good winter, so we can hopefully see that rise quite a bit this coming year. So
Thank you. Okay, so wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of the progress on activities around the lake. So this year's Phragmites treatment came and went. It's a short little window in which the treatments can take place. The second phase of that can happen over the remainder of the year, where we get our machines out there crushing and mowing the material that has been treated chemically. So this year we were able to treat 3,170 acres with chemical treatments. It's a really good sign because it means that of the over 9,000 acres of shoreline that historically has had mapped Phragmites, a large percentage of that, somewhere in the 70% range, is not currently covered with Phragmites. So we've got a lot of native vegetation coming back. We took a tour out in the Powell Slough with some professors from local universities who were astounded by the growth and variety and diversity of native vegetation coming back. So really positive response to these efforts. Even though they are an ongoing effort, we are seeing some great results. So just wanted to bring that up. This year we had, of the 393 total parcels around the lake, we were able to get contracts in place, permission contracts with 362 of those. A portion of them that said no are either grazing it or have their own way of dealing with it. And then a small portion just, are trying to figure out some other way to do it besides having us come out and take care of it for them. Wanted to give an update. We went down and took some photos. Commissioner Lee talked last time about the Sandy Beach project. It really is gorgeous down there. This is yesterday. The road down to it has been greatly improved. And then just the access points when you get down to the edge of that project are looking beautiful. There's a few other, the picnic pavilions are still kind of under progress, but the restrooms down there now, I would encourage you in these fall months, it'd be a great time to head down there and check it out. Sandy Beach. We must have gotten the earlier version. Let me just, so somehow we saved the wrong slides. I apologize. Saratoga Springs South Marina. I will send out the updated version that must not have saved this morning when I put it on the jump drive. But there is huge progress on the South Saratoga Springs Marina. The additional jetty to the north end of the existing marina is out there entirely. A portion of it is a little bit lower down, waiting to get the final layer on top. They've done the dredging around the outer edge of that marina, or not marina, but swim area. And it is looking amazing. It is a huge project. This year, they'll work on getting the parking lot area smoothed out and ready to go. And it'll be graded and ready for sand about the time that we're running low on funds, and the last item will be to get some sand down on the ground along that edge of the new swim area. So it really is looking beautiful. I apologize that those photos didn't come through. One last thing, the Nature Center. We've long talked about having a nature and research center on Utah Lake. This over the last few months, we've been doing some site evaluations of a variety of sites. This is the site that the group landed on that is being headed up through Division of Facilities and Maintenance Management. This is on the north end of the lake, really gorgeous area that Forestry, Fire and State Lands has worked on for a number of years now to do some restoration work. So not only is the site itself marvelously restored, but adjacent to that, as you head down the shoreline in either direction, we have wetlands that are looking really nice. Funding for that research center will go into the hopper in this year's legislative requests. And we expect sometime in the next year or two or three to get the funding to develop that nature center and research center right adjacent in that bottom corner. I don't know where I point, maybe here. Oh. So up in this top corner is the North Saratoga Springs Marina. Thanks to the Utah County tourism tax and a Forestry, Fire and State Lands grant and about $1 million from Saratoga Springs, that marina will be under construction here shortly. The contractor for dredging was just selected, and that marina project will be underway. That will be right adjacent to this research center, and that's one of the reasons why that site was so prominently selected, is that it will have the adjacency to a marina for easy access for researchers coming in and out of there. So I wanted to give you an update on that. Lastly, the Utah Lake Authority, a quick update. The Utah Lake Authority board is in place. We're working on the RFP for a master plan for that entity. At our upcoming meeting, which is at the end of this month, we'll adopt bylaws, adopt planning, budget, and then we're also working with the Department of Natural Resources Assistant Attorney General's group to get another Assistant Attorney General hired that can be representation for the Utah Lake Authority, and then we'll split that with a division there that we don't see kind of any likely interference or conflicts in the future, so that we can have good representation from a legal standpoint on that entity as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sam.
Yes, go ahead, Terry.
May I ask you a question, Eric? So I had someone call me the other day and said that there was a presentation made that was being represented, that the commission endorses islands and commercial building of commercial residence in the lake. And they were telling me you gave a presentation representing that the commission has supported that. Can you give me background on that? And is that correct? Or
the Islands project has been something that's been before our board numerous times over the last 4 years. And we've encouraged them to come in on occasion to keep our board up to date on what those plans are. The commission doesn't have a in favor or in opposition. We have a neutral stance on the project itself, and we have a resolution that was signed by the Utah Lake Commission back in January of this year that just kind of reaffirms that we're supportive of science-based solutions, going through the rigorous process of environmental review, and that project, just like any other one, would have to go through that review before we would weigh in and support or oppose that.
Thanks.
Okay, we thank you for your patience. I'll keep this brief. I know we're cutting close on time here. And I have to appreciate that Eric maybe missed some pictures. I completely forgot my slides. So we put these together this morning after arriving. So they're a little bit plain, but I wanted to highlight 3 particular things that our staff's been working on. One of which was brought up earlier is the 9/11 Day of Service. Last year, we had a lot of great success with this effort. We actually had 30 different groups show up and clean up all 27 public access points and 3 of the project areas at the lake that weren't technically classified public access points yet. This year was a little bit smaller in scale. I've already been taking some notes on how I could improve on getting the word out a little bit sooner to people. I think we were a little short on our timeline, but I did want to highlight some of the successes we did see. You've got a couple of photos on the screen here that show some of the groups that went out. One thing that I really liked that we had this year was that families actually signed up to take care of an access point. Last year we focused much more on, there were several LDS religious groups that reached out that were looking for several access points to send their members to. So I really liked the element of bringing families into the picture this year. Another thing wanted to make sure we hit on was we actually kind of divided the effort. We had our lake-wide organization where the commission basically put out a solicitation for groups to come to us, and we would train them and have them do their own cleanups at access points, which is comparable to how we do our ongoing annual, our ongoing Adopt a Shoreline program. But this year we also partnered up with Conserve Utah Valley and Vineyard City to do a larger scale cleanup specifically for the Vineyard Shoreline. So on the lake-wide effort, this is separate numbers from Vineyards. We actually had 10 other access points that were cared for this year. So far in the reports I've gotten, it added up to 24 volunteers at 4 of those 10. So I'm still waiting on some of the numbers there. But we're really appreciative of, we had a couple of families sign up, as I mentioned. We had a couple other religious groups sign up, a couple of businesses. So it was really great to see those and see those numbers coming in. We really appreciate everyone who volunteered. And for the Vineyard project, we actually had last count at 125 volunteers. Everybody met morning of at Sunset Beach Park in Vineyard, and Carolyn Jardine from Conserve Utah Valley was there with me, and we had several Vineyard City employees and elected officials there. And it was really awesome to see how many people came up. And we had everywhere from probably a 2 or 3 year old was our youngest. So I'm pretty sure I saw some people who were in their 70s who all came down to this park and then divided out amongst the 4 Vineyard public access points, either going over by car or walking along the beautiful trail that's there in Vineyard and helping to clean up garbage. And Vineyard City had their employee come right down the trail with one of their little go buggies or something. So people were able to fill their bags, bring them to the trail, and the city came along and collected it all up. So really cool event. We had some really great partners, which I think was a success that we did not have last year. We didn't partner with other agencies. We just tried to take care of just the cleanup. So it was really great to have that. And we love that we were able to tackle all 4 Vineyard access points in one go again, comparable to the Earth Day cleanup that we've done with Vineyard City in the past. So really a great event. I mentioned when we talked about the 9/11 cleanup last year that our Adopt a Shoreline program has been very hands-off. We try and train people and our staff can't get involved as much. And so it's done somewhat remotely. And we've been trying to integrate more events like the Earth Day cleanup with Vineyard, or we've done International Coastal Cleanup Day before. And I think this 9/11 Day of Service is a great element to include in our toolkit as well. Another thing that was mentioned previously is we're starting back up with the Utah Lake field trips. So this is specifically for 4th grade students here in the county. This year is probably going to be a little bit scaled back here in the fall. We're doing it on October 11th and 12th. Last check, we had 5 elementary schools accepted, and we anticipate over 500 4th grade students, plus their teachers and chaperones that'll be coming over the course of those 2 days. And where this is basically, before my time even at the commission, commission staff partnered with some local elementary teachers and developed Utah Lake lessons that matched up with curriculum and taught students about the lake. So we're really excited to try and provide again the field trips, which is kind of the realization for those teachers and students is when they teach those lessons, they can be accepted to attend the field trip, and they rotate around to different education stations. This year we have 11 presenters going. We've typically had around somewhere between 10 to 13 presenters depending on the season. And those vary. Those come from a Division of Water Quality, Central Utah Water Conservancy District. I was just talking with Danielle this morning about having the Hutchings Museum participate. Division of Wildlife Resources, a variety of different partners that we work with, and it would not be possible without those partnerships. So I wanted to make sure I thanked everybody that's either listening in online or hears from me again afterwards that's being one of those presenters. We really appreciate that partnership in educating the students. Our plan would be moving forward to reintegrate this back into our annual offering, which traditionally has been 4 days in the spring over at Utah Lake State Park and 2 days in the fall over at the Saratoga Springs Marina. That helps cater to the larger chunk of students in the valley. Being on the east side of the lake is why we do more in the spring. And we added that fall one in order to target, Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs and Lehigh and such. So we're excited to get that back into our regular events. It's been on hold since the pandemic started. And last but not least, just wanted to update you. We spoke at the beginning of the season about the life jacket loaner program was almost near completion. It has now been completed. So all 7 stations are operating. I think our summer intern and some volunteers and us, I think it was over 400 life jackets that were sprayed, tagged, and distributed. And we've had a couple of volunteers. We actually, Sullivan Love with Vineyard City has been an awesome partner for checking on the one at Vineyard Beach. And we've had a couple of volunteers who've roved around to some of those stations and help monitor and help restock so that those life jackets are available. And every time I hear back from them, they say, yep, some of the life jackets were wet. Somebody just came back and put them on the station. So we're really excited that people are using those regularly. And we look forward to continuing to maintain that program moving forward into the future.
Well, thank you so much. Anyone have any questions? Eric, you had a comment?
I just neglected to have Ben with Forestry Fire and State Lands was going to give us a quick update on Walkara Way project.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric. So for those that don't know what the Walkara Way project is it's a project that's primarily aimed at conservation and restoration efforts in the Powell Slough area of Utah Lake, and with a large emphasis on public access and trails within the slough. There's a lot of moving pieces with a project this large, so we are still in the final design stages of the project. This is primarily finalizing trail alignments and some of the amenities and designs of the amenities. But as part of the due diligence item that I undertook in the spring, we engaged with the title company to basically give us an ownership report of the lands that are within this project area, and had a couple of surprises in there that we're working through, and that is primarily why we're not in the exact final stages of the design there. But right now, I am facilitating some conversations with some of the landowners or families there with the BLM to find out if the claims that the families have will be recognized by the BLM. And this will be a good conversation to have, because I think it'll give us an idea of how to move forward. And we're hopeful that regardless of the outcome of that, since we all kind of have the same goal of conservation and public access, that the project will be able to move forward as planned. So that's basically where we're at. I hope by the next commission meeting, we'll be able to give a better update with some maps that depict locations and some of those amenities that we're discussing.
Thank you so much, Ben. Any questions for Ben? All right. Our next governing board meeting schedule, just as a reminder, will be December 8th at 11:30 a.m. And then we'll have one on March 16th at 11:30 a.m. And then we'll hear more about our celebratory banquet that's coming up from Eric. If there are any general comments from the public for something we didn't discuss or something that you would want to state, come up to the microphone and we will hear those now. Okay, it looks like there are no comments. Let's see. I just need a motion to adjourn. Okay, thank you. And a second? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, thank you so much.